Welcome into the horse race. I'm your host, Daniel Vaughn. Here we're going to cover all of the latest polling, news, and everything moving the 2024 election, just to keep you up to date on where things are headed and where we're going because it's October. This is the final month and the final stretch of the presidential election. So everything that happens has an even larger impact than it otherwise would. You've got Kamala Harris running out and doing a so-called media blitz, trying to steer the election more towards her because she's not done a lot of this, and Democrats now believe that's been hurting her, and so now she's trying to reverse that by going out and making these planned runs. In the meantime, Donald Trump continues campaigning on hitting the campaign trail, hitting all the swing states. So you have these shifting uh, paths between the two candidates. Harris is trying to do more media to make it appear like she's out there and defining herself more, something that I said here that she probably needed to do because the debate performance, while she may have won the debate, she didn't define herself. And so, ironically enough, she may have won all the headlines coming out of the debate, but she lost the overall war of trying to define herself and tell voters who she was in the race at large. And now she's having to pay the price. She's running out and hitting at places like The View. You're seeing her on Howard Stern's show, podcasts like Call My Daddy, those types of things. So you have Harris basically backpedaling and trying to reverse the overall campaign strategy in order to boost herself. So that is sort of the defining characteristic of this week. You have Harris out there doing her thing. So does that matter? Is it going to shift the polls? Is it going to shift where things are headed? That's the major question moving forward, because this type of pivot is something you only do if you believe that you have to change something in the race, particularly at this stage. For most candidates, if you're at this point in October, you should have your strategy locked in and you're just hammering it every day. In the past, you would have had, you've been preparing for more debates on down the line. By now, we're probably heading into our third or fourth debate if this was a stereotypical cycle. Obviously, this is much different than anything we've ever previous in America, but that's what you would expect. You would have a candidate who had a plan, the strategy would be ironed out, and you'd be hitting all your key points every day. Harris doesn't have any of that, so a lot of this is a trial by fire, not just for her, but the Democratic Party as a whole. Because the question of this race is, can you switch out a candidate last second and then successfully push forward a presidential campaign? And that's why the focus is primarily on Harris, because everyone my Democratic friends get angry because they wonder why everyone's just focusing on Harris and all her weaknesses in the race. But the reason is very simple. We know what Donald Trump is. If you look at all the polling around him, if you look at what people say about him, everyone knows what he is. There's no surprises left to be made here. Everyone's made up their mind on what Trump is, who he is, what he's going to do, what he would be like. You had 4 years of him. You now had 4 years without him. That's all well defined. The big question mark for everyone is, who is Kamala Harris? What is she going to do? What is her voting base? Because she's never run in a primary and she's never been out really outside of the state of California in any national politics, we don't know what a Kamala Harris coalition looks like. This is something that was not true for any previous person. We knew in 2020 what the plan was for Joe Biden. He was trying to win back the white working class, those without a college degree who were in the swing state battlegrounds, and you could just chip away at those that Donald Trump had pulled away in the 2016 election. That was pretty much the express purpose of nominating Joe Biden. You were trying to win back the voters that you had lost if you were a Democrat. Can Harris accomplish that? Polling suggests that she's actually performing worse than Hillary Clinton was at this stage. So the key for Harris is you're either hoping at this stage for a polling error that suggests that you actually did win this group of people just like Joe Biden, or you've got to go out and win the college educated vote, which is not as large as your white working class vote, or you're just your working class in general without a college degree. So that's the big question. How is Harris performing? What does her coalition look like? And that's a question that can't be answered simply because she didn't run in the primaries. She's never run in a national race before, so we don't know what her coalition is going to look like. Who is going to be voting for her, both in early voting that's happening now and on election day? That's something that just can't be known. So because that's the great unknown in this race, what we've seen over the last I would say about a week now, is there's been a distinct shift in how Democrats are viewing the race. Part of this is due to poor expectations management by Democrats. When Harris had her big sugar high, where she came out, had her honeymoon with the press, and everything looked grand, particularly coming out of the convention, Democrats really bought into that Kool-Aid. They bought into those high polling numbers. They bought into everybody in the country was with Harris. They bought into the notion that Harris was going to win by 5, 6, maybe as much as 7 points in some of these polls. That's not going to happen. If you knew anything about this race, you knew that those polls were showing a sugar high, and eventually they would come back down to earth. And that's what we've seen over the past month and a half. We've seen the race tighten up to around her having, depending on the week, between a 1.5 to a 2.5 point lead. This week, we're sitting at a 2 point lead in the polling averages. So that's where the race has settled. You're not getting that blowout win like Obama did in 2008. You've got to go and win this race. And that's the thing that Harris is struggling with, because if this is a close race, then it really matters who is her coalition. And this is not just me saying this. This is other very prominent people. So that's where we're going to start this week. We're going to start with Mark Halperin, who tweeted this week and put out a video. You can go to the two-way app, or you can go on YouTube and view the channel there. I'm not going to play the segment because you can really get the essence of it here. He said this week that he saw some new private polling that's very robust, private polling that says that Kamala Harris is in a lot of trouble. The conversations that Mark Halperin is having with Trump people and Democrats with data, they are extremely bullish on Trump's chances in the last 48 hours. Extremely bullish. And so he goes off and talks about this point that he's seen private polling specific to Democrats that shows that Harris is in a tight spot. Now, he's not alone there. If you go and look at CNN, they ran a segment on Democrats panicking because they're looking at these interviews and seeing the polls not budging. So this was a whole segment that CNN did on it, kind of recapping, because you see here in the Chiron, they had her on The View, Howard Stern, The Late Show. All that happened, and Democrats aren't seeing the needle move in any of the polls. Voters still have the same reaction to her. The Hill ran a piece saying the Democrats were starting to hit the panic button, and they're pointing to all the stuff that you've seen before. Some of this sounds like verbatim what we were saying about Joe Biden before he dropped out. You got them hitting nerves at all-time high. A lot of this stuff with Kamala Harris has masked the panic that had set in over Joe Biden's numbers, and the belief among Democrats is that if you swapped him out, you could get an infusion of possibilities with Harris that would change the dynamics of the race. But what they're seeing now, the closer we get to election day, is that the dynamics of the race haven't really shifted. What you have is a more energetic candidate, Harris, who's willing to go out and do some of the work, although obviously she shouldn't been out there a lot. But it's removed the health issues from top and center of voters' minds. Now it's just a question of, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And that's why Harris has this really awkward dance where she has to accept that she is the representative of the Biden administration in this race. And she said in interviews this week that she wouldn't change anything from the Biden administration. And so if voters see that and say, well, we want change and you're saying that you're the same, they're more than likely not going to go with someone like Donald Trump, or they're going to vote third party. They're not going to vote for the party in charge when they're demanding change. That is the irony. And so that's why you get these awkward moments where Harris or Walz or somebody, one of the other people who is one of the designated spokespeople for the Harris campaign will say something like, we can't go back. And, the natural response is, well, you can't go back. Where are we not going back to? Well, that implies you don't want to go back to the 4 years of the Biden administration if you're Harris. That's a line that Donald Trump can deliver because he's saying we want to go back to when the economy was good under me. We want to get rid of this Biden period here. So that is the big awkward period here. So you have Democrats hitting the panic button. It was notable, I thought, that the New York Times wrote a piece here that panned Kamala Harris's interview blitz this week. Notably, they said here at the beginning, one thing that, and by they mean the public here, one thing the public learned is how she keeps answering the question she wants, not the one that she was asked. And they kind of go off to try to blow this off a little bit by pointing out how politicians do this pretty frequently, particularly when you're talking about a subject that they don't want to talk about. So you have Bill Clinton here being talked about trying to diffuse activist pleas on how to end the AIDS, George W. Bush and climate change, Barack Obama and social media to avoid these in-depth interviews. And all that's very true. The difference is between Kamala Harris and any of these three here and anyone else is that she's doing this with every topic. It doesn't matter what topic that you're referring to, she is not answering a single question out of any of them. She will ramble on, give you a word salad and a very generic answer to very, expected questions, like how are you going to differentiate yourself from Biden? That was a question that she was asked multiple times this past week, and she didn't have an answer for it. She just sort of sat there stalling until she had delivered enough words, and you could just sort of, the interview just kind of walks away. It's like, well, I didn't get anything there. These are basic questions in front of a friendly audience, in front of a friendly interviewer, and she can't deliver on these things. She doesn't have an answer for these types of questions. And so, they call it the bob and weave strategy, but for anyone else, it's just she's not defining herself. This is a candidate that does not want herself defined in any way. And so the closer we get to election day, I think you're going to start seeing voters start to fill in the blanks here. And normally, if you're a candidate, you want to be the one to define what voters are thinking and saying about you. For Harris, she is basically letting them define them herself. So that is a dangerous thing because you don't know what voters are going to do. What are they going to do? Are they going to define you as a good candidate or a bad candidate? Right now, Harris has no say in how that's going to happen. She's letting the cards fall where they may. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is obviously hammering away at her and defining her in very specific terms. She has these chances here in all these interviews to provide an explanation, provide something for people to latch on to, and she's not doing it. That's a big problem for her, and it's not going away. So that's sort of what's happening on the large front here. Um, the the Wall Street Journal published a post that kind of goes back into what Mark Halpert's point is, because they get into some of the private polling as well. In this piece, where they talk about her struggling to break through with the working class, they very specifically target the so called blue wall states. So this is going to be Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and the rest. And they talk about a lot of the issues she has with working class voters. But the most important thing you need to know here is that they reveal an internal poll done by Democrat Tammy Baldwin's Senate campaign last week showed Harris losing Wisconsin by 3 points, while Baldwin was up by 2 points. So, in other words, you have a Democratic senator running ahead in her race, and Harris is 5 points below where that person is. That's a very large delta. And the person said much of the narrowing is due to Republican strength with non college educated men. Public polling has shown Harris with a slight lead in the state. And that's partially true, although we're going to look at some of that public polling. So you have this is internal polling that's been leaked to the Wall Street Journal showing that Harris is losing. Now, this is critical here. One of the reasons that a Democrat would leak to the Wall Street Journal a more conservative post is that you could, as a Democrat, you could have your Democratic voters sort of, ignore this and say, well, that's the Wall Street Journal. I'm just going to ignore that. This is a shot across the bow of Kamala Harris, though. This is something you leak to tell her you are losing my state and you're not paying enough attention to it. And if you lose this state, you're probably going to lose the election, which is transparently true. If Harris loses Wisconsin, she's going to be looking up at the losers column likely on election night, much like Hillary Clinton was, because this was the state that effectively decided the race. Although I think, as we're going to see here, there are ways where it doesn't decide it. It's just one of the states that delivers for one candidate or the other. So you have these internal polls. So Mark Halperin is not revealing who he is looking at. He's just saying that he's talking to Republicans and Democrats who have access to the polling data. They're bullish on Trump's chances. You get these leaks here from Democratic senators who are saying Harris is losing in critical battlegrounds, and notably, a 3-point loss here by Harris would be seismic because that is a very large lead for one of these battleground states. That's not something that you can ignore. Now, sometimes these internal polls are correct, sometimes they're not. It's like all the public polling, but it is notable that Democrats are here saying that in the polls that they have done, they're not showing Harris ahead. So notably, this is a place with a lot of working class. You see more of this too in other interviews. So the Teamsters president, Sean O'Brien, went on a podcast and said that the Democratic Party is bought for and paid for by big tech, and just spent the entire time blasting the Democratic Party in this interview. He used a lot of profanity, saying they messed up the union, despite all the contributions. And so, he's saying, I'm a Democrat, but they've messed up the last 40 years. And so you're seeing this movement here where unions are breaking with the Democratic Party. Now, how far did this go? Some polling suggests it could go pretty far. Others suggest that it's not as bad for Democrats. The problem is that for Harris, if you're already polling poorly with this group and they're saying point blank in interviews that you are a failure and your party is a failure, you have a you have an uphill battle here to try to reverse a trend. So these are the dynamics at play here. Again, we focus on Harris because we don't know who her coalition is. We don't know who's going to vote for her. And we know who is going to vote for Trump. We've seen his coalition now twice. We've seen it in 16 and 20, and one race it was enough. In 2020, Joe Biden was able to chip into Trump's lead among the working class and sort of win back the presidency that way among thin margins, frankly. So the question is Harris able to recapture that 2020 coalition, or is she receding behind what happened in 2016? And a lot of these Democrats are saying that Harris is running worse than the 2016 race. So that said, we're going to jump in here. I believe we're going to start here with some betting odds. So I want to sort of lay some groundwork here before jumping into polls and talk about where betting odds are, because this is where people who are laying down money saying we are reading this race, and it kind of gives you an idea of where things are headed. And the notable thing is right now, so Real Clear Politics has a nice feature here where they average all the main betting markets here. And right now, every single one of them has the advantage to Donald Trump. And you can sort of see this here in the bottom chart here. We're going to zoom in here over the last 3 months. So Trump had a large lead when Biden was still in the race. But you see Harris come up here, and you see her first peak here with a lead over Donald Trump. This is going to be the peak of her honeymoon period when she was leading. After jumping in, you get the convention, and everything's going swimmingly, and then that dies off. So this is where the first sugar high dies off, and you see sort of things, even up here, and then Trump eventually pulls back into the lead in the betting markets. And then that brings you to the first part of September, and that's when the first debate happens. So from the first debate on, we've really had Harris leading, but Trump has bottomed out in betting markets, and you're seeing him pick back up to this week. He's now in the lead in the betting markets. Across the board, of all the main ones here, he's taken the lead. Now, one of the reasons that I want to focus on this is because if betting markets are right on this, we're going to have a quick race, because one of them, Polymarket, has a question up of to their bettors of which way are the swing states going to go. And notably, again, these aren't polls, so I'm not expecting these kind of margins, but this is where the money is sitting right now. And so right now you've got Trump with an 8-point lead among bettors in Pennsylvania, 20 points in North Carolina, and 28 points here in Georgia. Again, these are not polls. That's not why I'm bringing this up. It is the confidence level that bettors have in these swing states. Now, note these three here: Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia. We're going to jump here and look at this map here. So this is the current map where the swing states are. I know, Democrats and Republicans both know that the red state's going to go for Trump. Blue states are going to go for Harris. So this kind of gives you the toss-up here. These are the battlegrounds. This is where it's going to be. If betting markets are right and you flip Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania over to Donald Trump, he has 270 electoral votes. That's the race. That's ball game. You don't even have to think about anything else. It doesn't matter what happens in Michigan. It doesn't matter what happens in Wisconsin or out here out in the Southwest. The race is over. And these are East Coast states and Eastern time zones. So if they flip to Trump and it's a cakewalk for him in these states, you're looking at a short election night, because we're going to know for certain that he's won without looking at any of the rest of these. That is a dangerous place for Kamala Harris. She has to win Pennsylvania. This is becoming must win. In fact, at this point, given how poorly she's doing in some of these southern states here, the Sun Belt states, her only path forward right now is taking Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and that's looking like a very difficult task for her. So remember this path here. So this is where betting markets right now. They've shifted back to Trump. They're saying and leaning for these three states here. This is ignoring Arizona here. Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia are all leaning there. And if that happens, just those three alone, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia, if that happens early on, you've got 270 electoral college votes. That's the presidency. Donald Trump is president, and that's all she wrote. And of course, I know that news stations will prolong that night saying, well, we don't know where all these states are going to go and how they're going to vote. Listen, I know where these states are going to go on election night. I know Texas is going to go for Trump. I know California is going to go for Harris. The only question is where the rest of these are going to fall. There could be, if it's a really, really good night for Donald Trump, you could see him sneak in here with New Mexico, but that is an afterthought compared to these three states. Excuse me. So that's why the focus is so heavy on these, because if if this happens, all roads close for Harris. There is no return from this. She could sweep the rest of these states, and she's still going to lose. But frankly, if she wins these three, I would call Trump a lock for at least one of these, and then he's probably taking one or both of these as well, and it's going to be the equivalent of a blowout for Democrats on that front. So with that in mind, I wanted to show another chart here to kind of give you an idea of what to think as we're sort of heading towards election day. So I mentioned poll closing times and Eastern time zones here. So all times for this map are in Eastern. So you have here the first closing polls are going to be at 6 o'clock Eastern. That's going to be in Kentucky here and Indiana. But that next wave, 7 o'clock, that's the critical one. So at 7 o'clock Eastern, you're going to have Florida, Georgia, Virginia, and South Carolina close, and the other half of Kentucky. Now, that's, Kentucky's great. I know where they're going to go. Every election here for the last few cycles, we know the Democrats are eventually going to win the state, but it's always taken them much longer to call the state because you have to wait for Northern Virginia to report their results. Florida was probably going to be a quick state. And the key state here is going to be Georgia because it's going to be the first ones up. And if Donald Trump starts out hot here, that's going to kind of give you an idea of how the rest of the night's going to go. Then you got the next wave. So at 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central, where I am, you got the big one here, Pennsylvania. And the moment this one closes across the entire state, it's the game's on then. You also have Michigan closing in, and people are watching that, but this is it right here because you're going to have an hour here between when Wisconsin and Minnesota close, where it's just going to be Pennsylvania and it's just going to be Michigan, and that's going to determine where the rest of the nights go. So, you got here, Arizona and some of these other states going to be at 9 o'clock, and 10 o'clock here for Nevada and some of these others. By the time we get out here, we're going to know what's happening particularly with Pennsylvania, and we're going to have an idea of what's starting to happen in Wisconsin. It'll take a while to count some of these places, but we're going to know kind of what happens. And again, when Trump won in 2016, we knew he was walking away with some of these blue wall states, and it was game over for Hillary Clinton. And that very well could happen again this time because the thing about this race is Harris is looking much more like Hillary Clinton, much less like Joe Biden. Again, we don't know what her margins are going to be because we don't know what her coalition looks like. Everything is just sort of a guessing game right now, looking at polls and kind of looking how Democrats are doing with different demographic groups. But this is going to be the ball game here because we're going to know early on that night how, if Harris can pull it out here, that's going to open up the rest of the map for her. If Trump wins and we're looking at him taking Georgia, you're going to look at a very quick night because their Democrats are not going to have an easy way forward after that. So that's the time zones, sort of to give you an idea because these first three here, they're going to be big and they're going to tell you, and it's going to determine what happens a lot on election night. So that's where the battleground states are, sort of as a 30,000 foot view. In this next segment here, we're going to jump into the national polls, and we're going to hit up some of the actual polling that's happening across these battleground states to give you an idea of what's happening here. So this is where we are in the Real Clear Politics average right now on Thursday, October the 10th. We didn't have a ton of October polling for a little bit, but we had a flood come in over the last few days. The main thing I want to notice in the national polls, you've got Harris here with a +2. That's not much of a big of a change. If you look down here at the chart and look at the past 30 days, that's not a huge change. Harris has been in and around 2 points, plus or minus, for really the past month, with no real change there. One of the things that has changed, though, is where some of these pollsters have Trump. So last week I noted this Reuters Ipsos poll here. One of the things I noted is that they had Harris with a very large 6 point lead. Right now you're seeing them with a +2 lead for Harris. And if you scroll in here and look at it, you'll see here it was Harris at 50, Trump at 44. And I noted then that Trump at 44 just didn't make a lot of sense. We know that Donald Trump is probably going to be closer to 47% on election night. If you go up here and look at it, what have they done? They have Trump at 49%. So this narrowing here is less about Harris, falling or moving. She went from 50 to 51. It is they fixed where they were with Donald Trump. So, and there's a few other here. So you have Susquehanna here. They have Trump at 44. That's not something that's likely going to happen. I mean, Donald Trump got 46% in 2016 when he was, more unknown at that point. He's going to be closer to 47%, which is what Real Clear Politics has here. And that's what you've got to know moving into this race. So, uh, this is sort of an overview of kind of where everything is, um, and kind of where things are right now. Not a lot of movement, just frankly. I mean, all these interviews, everything else, there's not a lot of movement for Harris. There's not a lot of movement towards Trump. You're seeing some of these pollsters fix some of their errors here and say, well, Trump's probably doing a little bit better. And so, that's just kind of where things are. There's not a lot of movement here. Where it gets a little bit more interesting is in the battleground states. Um, right now in Pennsylvania, you've got Trump with a slight lead. This is not really that much different from last time. This .2 is probably going to go, unless there's more polling that comes in. This Bloomberg +5 is Harris's last real gas period, a really positive poll for her. If another one drops for her that's even positive, it's more like this Quinnipiac poll here, and this one falls out, you're going to see Trump's lead actually increase because this is a very positive result for Harris. So eventually, this is going to drop out for an October poll. I don't know when that's going to happen here, but we're getting there because this 9-19 to 10-8, that's a big spread for a battleground state. So we need more polling in Pennsylvania. There, you're going to see some of these other states, they've had a lot of polling. Pennsylvania needs more. I understand it's an expensive state to poll, but it's going to determine this election. So we need more polling of it. You're probably going to start look here in the next few weeks where pollsters are going to start releasing their final polls with some of these battleground states because this is just where we are. Um, right now, you've got Trump, with a positive lead. What I would note here is if you look at the sort of the last 3 months here, you have Biden withdrawing from the race and you have Harris surging. And for the longest time, it looked tied, maybe Harris with a slight lead. But what's really happened is that Trump bottomed out really at the end of August, and he's climbed back above to where he was here around some of his peaks. And Harris is sort of flatlined in and around, right around 48%, with Trump performing in and around 48.5, 49%. So Trump has climbed in just ever so slightly in this chart, with Harris sort of flatlining here. This is not the type of trend line you want to see if you're a Democrat and you're trying, again, Democrats believed that a blowout win was coming after they switched out Biden for Harris, and that's not reflected here. So it's a tight race in Pennsylvania. It's probably going to be decided on a margin, something similar to like this. So, be ready because that's what's coming. Next up, we're going to hit up Wisconsin here. So remember, this is the state that Tammy Baldwin, Democratic senator, said that Harris was losing by 3 points. In the Real Clear Politics average, he's only got a .5 lead here. The last two polls that have come in have shown Trump with the lead in this state. So this is, as I've noted several times, one of the most notoriously difficult races for pollsters because they've gotten it consistently wrong, sometimes by a lot, in each of these races. So it's going to be a tight one on election night. Democrats internally in that state do not believe that Harris has even this part of a lead. This is a race that they think she's behind in, and that's why you have the senator from that state firing, broadsides across Harris's line, saying you've got to fix this. Basically, that's why you leak that kind of poll. You're trying to get her to change the course of action, because this is not this is a trend line that you don't want as your Democrat, because it shows that yep, she had this period here where she was doing great, and now it's reversing. So whether or not this holds, who knows? But right now, these are not the trend lines you want if you're a Democrat. In Georgia, She's made a big splash trying to go in there a lot. This is also not where you want to be if you're her. Trump has a 1 point lead in Georgia. The best poll for Harris most recently is a tie. Fox News had her leading by 3, which is her next best one here, although I would note that's a pretty small sample size and well within the margin of error. And so, the trend lines here, also not good. You've got here, if you look at the chart of Georgia, Harris is struggling to break above 48%, and Trump has bounced back much closer to 49 to 50%. There is more room for Trump to grow in Georgia than there probably is for Harris right now. And she's got to reverse her fortunes here, too. So if she's going to lose someplace like Pennsylvania, she's got to pick up a state like Georgia to give herself a chance on election night and have the map reopen up. But that said, I would expect this in North Carolina sort of follows a similar pattern to Georgia here, where it's been a steady drip of polls for Trump. So Georgia and South Carolina or North Carolina are similar in that respect. The state that's kind of surprised me with its polling is Michigan. Trump has a half-point lead in Michigan, and the last 3 polls into the average here are all pro-Trump. It's been a while since Harris has gotten, you have an older New York Times poll in here showing her with a 1 point lead. You really have to go back to the middle of September before she has 2 plus 3 point leads here. And you have Rasmussen here. So you have some older polls here, and I ignore Rasmussen almost like I would almost ignore Quinnipiac. Again, just throw all these in a average and you get a much better margin here. But Michigan at Trump point 5 is a bad sign for her because if you look here in October, Biden was leading by 6.7. Clinton had a 7.3 lead. They both barely escaped those races by the skins of their teeth. Clinton outright lost it. Biden barely won it, and Trump has a polling lead here. So one of the things that is scaring Democrats here is that they're expecting Donald Trump to outperform his polling. And if he does, you can expect all these states to shift towards him because he will end up getting better results on election day than he has been getting in the polls. Where that happens again, of course, is an open discussion. I actually think because he is polling better this cycle, there is less chance of a polling error in his favor, just because he's hitting the marks that you would expect him to hit on an election day. Now, if he outperforms that's a much different question. That's a wholly different ball of wax. But if he's hitting the marks that you would expect him to, then you kind of would expect, if he's sitting around 47% nationally and you're showing him running better in some of these battleground states, well, that kind of shows you that maybe pollsters have fixed some of their Trump polling problems, and it's just a matter of getting the right mixture in their likely voting screens. So, again, Michigan's been kind of a surprise here to see how hard it's shifted towards Trump and recently. Arizona is another one where there's been a lot of polling, less so in here in October, but if you're looking across the month of September, they polled a lot, and Trump had a very consistent lead in most of those polls. So you only have 3 polls here where they have Harris lead, and the rest of these are just Trump, with a significant lead. Right now he has a 1.4. Again, caveat to that because we only have 1 poll that even sneaks into October. We want to get some more October polling to show us what's happening here, but these are not the trend lines that you want. So, the race that this reminded me of very early on, before you were talking about Harris looking like Hillary Clinton in 2016, it reminded me a lot of 2012 with Barack Obama. In that race, Mitt Romney was tight nationally with Obama in those numbers. However, he struggled across all of the battleground states. And so if you use the battleground states as your clue, they pointed to an Obama victory, whereas Romney had won back a lot of Republicans who just had lost faith in the party in 2008, which is kind of contributed to that landslide victory. And in 12, you saw Romney get all those voters back, but he couldn't because of his background in Bain Capital and just you still had the after effects of the great financial crisis. People weren't going to vote for that. And so he lost across all these battleground states, losing specifically white working class voters. Trump doesn't have that issue with that voting set. He is pulling them away from Democrats, and it is driving them absolutely insane. How far can he push those margins remains to be seen. Again, we're talking about a 2 point lead here nationally. There's not been a lot of movement over the last 30 days. If you go back over the last 6 months, You have periods here where things kind of stabilize out. They both jump up here. Um, Trump's around 47%. You've got Harris around 49%. This would be a perfect explanation for what happens in the national popular vote. You have all those voters who looked at Biden and said, I just can't vote for him anymore. I'm not even going to say I'm going to support him. They're rejuvenated. So you get back the mainline Democrats who are voting for Harris now. But 2 points. This is where it gets real hairy for Harris because Clinton won the national popular vote by 2.1 points. Even with the New York Times here, their most recent poll, they have Harris leading by 3. That is not where she needs to be. Ideally, if you're a Democrat, you want her with a margin like Biden's, where she is winning that popular vote by 4 points. That's probably what a Democrat needs in order to win in this race. 3 points takes you out of that. Nate Silver thinks that she could win with as low as 2.5 points. And that's great for Nate. I don't personally think that. I don't think that's enough of a margin. I think they have to hit that 4 points to feel comfortable. If it's between 2 and 3 points here with the margin that she wins at, then it's going to be tight, but Trump can still pull that out. If she hits 2 points here and she's below where Clinton was in 2016, um, that's close to a guaranteed loss because that's not the margin that you need. And if she dips below that, then it gets even worse. So for Harris, because we don't know who her coalition is, the big question is what is this actual number here? Does she close with 2 points in the national popular vote, or is she going to fade hard like we saw with Clinton and Biden? If you even shave a point or two off, like happened in those races for Clinton and Biden, you can knock this down to around a Harris 1 point lead. And if that happens, you're talking about Trump landslides in a lot of these battleground states where they just shift so hard towards him that there's no hope for Harris. So um, these numbers tightening up here are something that is causing Democrats to panic. Again, going back to the beginning here, you've got Democrats panicking because the honeymoon period is over, the sugar high is gone, and they don't have anything to move this race right now. That's why you've seen things come out like Fox News talking about another debate. Trump has said no because Trump is looking at these numbers too and saying there's no need for me to go out and do a debate. I don't need the race to change. So instead, you've got Harris running out here and doing an ad blitz, a media blitz, trying to convince people I am something that you need to vote for. Uh, the problem for her, it may be too late now. It may be too late to do that because the time to start defining yourself is not October. You need to be doing these things much earlier. Now, again, she couldn't do these things much earlier because she was the vice president and she was working with Biden for most of this year. So this is a unique, situation here. But even with that, with convention, with all these, with these interviews that she's doing and the first debate, she should have made the case for who she was and why people should have voted for her. And now she's sitting here in the middle of October, and voters don't know what the answers to those questions are. And they're looking around just saying, do I am better off now than I was 4 years ago? Or does that need change? And if they go into the voting booth thinking we need change, that's something that's likely going to benefit Donald Trump because he represents that change agent to the system because he's not in office. And if you want change, that means necessarily that you're probably not going to vote for the person who is holding office. So this is the big hurdle. Harris is now fighting an uphill battle in this race. She can obviously still win it. This is not impossible, but we are looking at this now, asking the question that has no answer now from any reliable source. What is the voting base? What is the voter coalition that Harris brings to Election Day? Does she perform better than the polls suggest with working class voters? Or is she offsetting those losses with more college educated voters? Those are the two main paths that she's going to take here. It's unclear which one the campaign is going to take. She's already struggling with unions, which suggests more weakness among working class voters than you might otherwise think. But we don't know what her coalition looks like and how it's going to break down. And so that's why the focus is heavily on Harris because we don't know who's going to vote for her on election day. And it doesn't mean, again, I know there's people who say, well, I'm going to vote for her. That's not the question. The question is, what is the demographic coalition of hers going to look like on election day? What's their makeup? How much of them are working class versus, suburban working, your white collar workers? Who is she bringing in? No one can answer that. And so until you get a firm and grip on that, you're going to continue seeing these panicking stories from Democrats moving forward because they don't know the answer either, and they don't know the right lever to get to the right answer at the end of the day. So expect more of these panic stories unless there's just some massive change in the press because Democrats are struggling and they can't answer the question of who's going to vote for Harris on election day. So that's all I've got for this week. So make sure to tune in next time and we'll go through all the latest polls and whatever's happened over the last week. I'll talk to you then.